28.35 liters. That's not a typo. 28,353 cubic centimeters of displacement in one engine, in one car, built in 1910. I mean, come on, that's bigger than most modern diesel truck engines. Hell, that's bigger than some boat engines. And Fiat, yes, the company that brought you the 500, decided this was perfectly reasonable for a car designed to break speed records on public roads. You're probably thinking I made a mistake. Maybe I meant 2.8 liters. Nope. 28.35. 4 cylinders. Each one the size of a paint bucket. Actually bigger than a paint bucket. Each cylinder displaced 7 liters. 7! Most entire engines today don't displace 7 liters. This thing had 4 of them. The pistons were 190 millimeters in diameter. That's about 7.5 inches for those keeping track. You could fit a dinner plate inside each cylinder bore. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't some experimental prototype that never left the drawing board. They built it. They ran it. And it worked. Sort of. The Beast of Turin, as it came to be known, was Fiat's answer to a simple question. How do you go faster than 200 kilometers per hour in 1910? The answer, as it turned out, was to build the biggest engine the world had ever seen and strap it to 4 wheels. Elegant? No. Subtle? Absolutely not. Effective? Well, that's where things get complicated. The early 1900s were a weird time for cars. Nobody really knew what they were doing yet. Every manufacturer had their own ideas about what made sense. Some thought electric was the future. Others were convinced steam power was the way to go. And then you had companies like Fiat, who apparently decided that the solution to every problem was more displacement. More cylinders, more everything. This was the era of the land speed record battles. Now don't get me wrong. Calling them battles makes them sound organized. They weren't. It was more like a series of increasingly unhinged attempts by wealthy maniacs to prove their country made the fastest cars. France had been dominating with cars like the Gobron Brie. Germany was getting serious with Benz, and their Blitzen Benz. Italy had Fiat, and Fiat had an idea. The S76 project started in 1909. The brief was simple: build something faster than anything else on Earth. The approach they took was, shall we say, characteristically Italian. While everyone else was trying to make their cars more aerodynamic or reduce weight, Fiat's engineers just said screw it and built the biggest engine they could physically fit between 4 wheels. The thing was so massive that the driver sat behind the engine. Not next to it, behind it. Like way behind it. The hood was over 2 meters long. Now check this out. The engine itself was a masterpiece of excess. Those 4 cylinders were arranged in line because apparently making it a V configuration would have been too sensible. This created an engine block that was over 2 meters long by itself. 2 meters! The crankshaft alone weighed more than most modern engines. The connecting rods were the size of a grown man's arm. Everything about this engine was cartoonishly oversized. But wait, there's more. The valve train was exposed, completely exposed. You could watch the valves opening and closing as the engine ran. The overhead valve design was actually pretty advanced for 1910, but having it all exposed meant that hot oil would spray everywhere when the engine was running. The mechanics had to wear special suits when working on it. The driver just had to deal with it. Starting this monster was an event in itself. You couldn't just turn a key. First, you had to heat the spark plugs with a blowtorch. Yes, a blowtorch. Then two men, and I mean two strong men, would have to turn the massive starting handle while a third person managed the ignition. Sometimes it would take 30 minutes just to get it running. Once it was running though, oh boy, the sound this thing made was apparently indescribable. Contemporary accounts describe it as sounding like continuous thunder. Others said it was like artillery fire. The exhaust note was so loud that when they ran it at Brooklands, people could hear it from miles away. And remember, this was 1910. People were used to horses. Imagine being some farmer in the English countryside and suddenly hearing what sounds like the apocalypse coming from the racetrack. 300 horsepower. That was the claimed output. Now that might not sound like much today. Your average family sedan makes that much. But in 1910, that was insane. Most cars made maybe 30 horsepower. 40, if you were lucky. The Blitzen Benz, which held the land speed record at the time, made 200. The Beast of Turin made 300. At least that's what Fiat claimed. Nobody really knows for sure because dyno testing wasn't exactly sophisticated back then. The transmission was a 4-speed manual. I say transmission, but it was really just a collection of gears held together by hope and prayer. The clutch was a multi-disc unit that was about as subtle as the rest of the car. You didn't slip the clutch in the Beast. You either engaged it or you didn't. There was no in-between. First gear was essentially useless for anything except getting the car moving from a dead stop. By the time you hit second gear, you were already going faster than most cars' top speed. The chassis was, to put it mildly, inadequate. It was essentially a ladder frame made of steel that was constantly on the verge of twisting itself into a pretzel. The suspension was leaf springs all around, which meant that hitting a bump at speed was an adventure in involuntary flight. The brakes? The brakes were a suggestion. They were drums on the rear wheels only, operated by cables. Cables! Trying to stop 28 liters of fury with cable-operated drums was like trying to stop a freight train with a parachute. Here's where things get really interesting, though. They built two of these things, not one. Two. Because apparently one 28-liter death machine wasn't enough. The first one was completed in 1910 and immediately shipped to England for testing at Brooklands. The second one was finished a few months later and kept in Italy for testing at the Monza circuit. Well, not the Monza we know today. That wasn't built until 1922. This was a different track, but I digress. The Brooklands attempt in December 1911 was where the Beast really showed what it could do, or rather, what it couldn't do. Pietro Bordino, who was either very brave or very stupid, possibly both, was chosen as the driver. The car was wheeled out onto the banking. The engine was started after the usual half-hour ritual, and Bordino set off. The first few laps were promising. The car was clearly fast, very fast, but Brooklands had this nasty bump on the banking. Every car hit it, but most cars weighed a fraction of what the Beast weighed and weren't going nearly as fast. When the Beast hit that bump at full speed, it literally took off. All four wheels left the ground. Bordino somehow kept control, but that was enough excitement for one day. They tried again the next day. This time, Bordino was ready for the bump. He kept the car on the ground mostly and managed to clock an unofficial speed of 135 miles per hour. That's 217 kilometers per hour in 1911 in a car with the aerodynamics of a barn door and the handling characteristics of a shopping cart. It was the fastest anyone had ever gone in a car at that point. But here's the thing, it was unofficial. The timing equipment wasn't properly certified. The run wasn't sanctioned by any governing body. And Fiat, in their infinite wisdom, decided not to try for an official record. Why? Nobody really knows. Maybe they realized that going any faster would definitely kill someone. Maybe they ran out of money. Maybe they just decided that they'd proved their point. Whatever the reason, the beast never got its official moment of glory. The second car had an even more interesting story. It was kept in Italy and used for demonstration runs. Prince Scipione Borghese, who was apparently the kind of person who thought driving a 28-liter engine was a reasonable weekend activity, bought it and used it for hill climbs. Hill climbs. Can you imagine trying to navigate a narrow mountain road in a car that's longer than most modern pickup trucks and has the turning radius of an oil tanker? Eventually, as these things go, both cars were pretty much abandoned. They were too expensive to maintain, too dangerous to drive, and too impractical for literally anything. The first car ended up in Australia, of all places, where it was discovered in a shed in the 1960s. The second car disappeared entirely. For decades, people thought both cars were lost. But then, and this is where it gets crazy, in 2003, a British enthusiast named Duncan Pittaway decided he wanted to rebuild the beast. Not restore it, rebuild it. From scratch, using whatever original parts he could find and fabricating the rest. The madman actually did it. It took him 10 years, but he built a fully functional replica of the Beast of Turin. And get this, he drives it. Regularly, he takes it to Goodwood. He's run it at speed events. He's even taken it back to Brooklands. The thing still makes 300 horsepower, still sounds like the end of the world, and still requires multiple people and a blowtorch to start. Some things never change. Watching footage of the rebuilt beast running is surreal. It's like watching a dinosaur. You can see the exposed valve train working, see the massive pistons pumping up and down, hear that incredible sound. It's mechanical poetry. Terrifying, deafening mechanical poetry. But poetry nonetheless. The flames that shoot out of the exhaust are the size of a person. The ground literally shakes when it drives by. What's fascinating to me is the mentality that created this thing. Think about it. Fiat's engineers sat down in 1909 and decided that the solution to going fast was to just make everything bigger. Not better, not more efficient, just bigger. It's such a beautifully simple approach. Stupid, but simple. It's like solving world hunger by making one enormous sandwich. The Beast of Turin represents a very specific moment in automotive history. A moment when anything seemed possible because nobody knew what was impossible yet. There were no rules, no conventions, no established way of doing things. If you wanted to put a 28-liter engine in a car, you could. If you wanted to make the driver sit 2 meters behind the front axle, go for it. If your solution to insufficient power was to just make the cylinders bigger until they were the size of waste baskets, nobody would stop you. Modern Formula One engines make over 1,000 horsepower from 1.6 liters. That's 625 horsepower per liter. The Beast made 300 horsepower from 28.35 liters. That's about 10.6 horsepower per liter. My kitchen blender's more efficient, but efficiency wasn't the point. The point was to go fast by any means necessary. And if that meant building an engine so large it defied common sense, so be it. You know what kills me? The beast was actually successful. It achieved its goal. It was the fastest car in the world when it was built. It proved that Fiat could compete with anyone. It demonstrated Italian engineering prowess. And then they just stopped. They never tried to officially claim the record. They never developed the concept further. They just built 2 of them, ran them a few times, and called it a day. Meanwhile, other manufacturers learned from the beast. They realized that maybe, just maybe, there was such a thing as too big. The cars that came after started focusing on aerodynamics, on weight reduction, on better chassis design. The era of just making everything bigger was over almost as soon as it began. The Beast of Turin was both the pinnacle and the end of that approach. But that's what makes it so special. It's a perfect time capsule of early automotive ambition, when engineers were still figuring out the basic rules, when the solution to every problem was more power, more displacement, more cylinders, more everything. It was unsustainable, impractical, and absolutely glorious. The influence of the beast can still be felt today, in a weird way. Every time some manufacturer builds something completely excessive, just because they can, they're following in Fiat's footsteps. The Bugatti Veyron with its 1,000 horsepower, the Dodge Demon with its drag radials from the factory, the Mercedes-AMG 1 with its Formula One engine. They're all spiritual successors to the beast. Cars that exist not because they make sense, but because someone wanted to push the boundaries of what was possible. What really gets me is thinking about the people involved, the engineers who designed this thing, the mechanics who maintained it, the drivers who risked their lives piloting it. They all had to buy into this collective insanity. They had to believe that building a 28-liter engine was not only possible, but necessary. That level of commitment to an absolutely bonkers idea is admirable. Pietro Bordino, the primary driver, deserves special mention. This guy strapped himself into a 2-ton missile with terrible brakes and no safety equipment whatsoever. The car didn't even have a windshield. He sat there, completely exposed, while 28 liters of barely controlled explosion happened a few feet in front of him, and he did it repeatedly, for fun. The man had bowling balls for testicles. The mechanics were equally brave, or stupid. Remember, this thing sprayed hot oil everywhere when it ran. The exhaust was just pipes sticking out of the hood. No mufflers, no catalytic converters, obviously. Just straight pipes bellowing fire and noise. Working on this car while it was running must have been like working in hell's own garage. Even the spectators were at risk. There are accounts of people being literally blown over by the exhaust when the beast drove by. The sound was so loud, it could damage hearing. The vibrations could be felt through the ground hundreds of meters away. Watching this thing run was a full-contact sport. The fact that nobody died during the beast's active period is miraculous. This was an era before safety regulations, before crash testing, before roll cages or fire suits or HANS devices. If something went wrong at speed, which it easily could have, the driver would have been turned into paste. The car weighed over 2 tons and had the structural integrity of a garden shed. One serious crash, and it would have been game over. But somehow, miraculously, both cars survived their racing careers intact. Sure, they were abandoned and forgotten for decades, but they survived. The fact that Duncan Pittaway was able to rebuild one is testament to how overbuilt these things were. The engine blocks were so massive, they were practically indestructible. The crankshafts were so huge, they could probably survive a nuclear war. Speaking of the rebuild, can we talk about what an absolute legend Duncan Pittaway is? This man looked at the beast of Turin, a car that was considered insane when it was new, and thought, I should build one of those, not restore one, build one from scratch, using 100-year-old engineering drawings and whatever original parts he could scrounge up. The amount of work involved is staggering. He had to fabricate almost everything. The engine block had to be cast specially. The crankshaft had to be forged. The pistons, the size of dinner plates, remember, had to be custom made. Every single component had to be either found, restored, or created from nothing. It was like building a dinosaur from DNA fragments. And he didn't modernize anything. He could have easily added modern safety equipment, better brakes, actual suspension, maybe a windshield, but no. He built it exactly as it was in 1910. Blowtorch starting procedure and all. That's commitment to authenticity that borders on masochism. The first time he started, it must have been terrifying. Imagine spending 10 years building this thing, not knowing if it would even run. Then firing it up and having 28 liters of century-old engineering roar to life inches from your face. I would have needed new pants, but it worked. It ran. It made the same 300 horsepower as the original. It made the same glorious, terrifying noise. It even shoots the same massive flames from the exhaust. Pittaway didn't just rebuild a car. He resurrected a monster. And now he races it. Actually races it. Takes it to vintage events and runs it at full throttle. The man has ice water in his veins. Every time he drives it, he's one mechanical failure away from catastrophe. One broken connecting rod would turn the engine into a grenade. One chassis failure would fold the car in half. But he does it anyway, because that's what the beast was built for. Watching modern footage of the beast at Goodwood is like watching a nature documentary about a creature that shouldn't exist. It's so out of place among the other vintage racers. Everything else looks delicate and refined by comparison. The beast looks like it was designed by someone who had only heard descriptions of cars, but had never actually seen one. The way it moves is unlike anything else. It doesn't accelerate so much as surge forward in waves of power. Each power stroke of those massive pistons creates a pulse of acceleration. The whole car rocks back and forth as the engine runs. It's less like driving and more like riding a mechanical bull that's trying to kill you. The turning radius is comedic. Watching it try to navigate a hairpin turn is like watching an aircraft carrier try to parallel park. The driver has to plan every corner about 3 days in advance, and God help you if you need to stop suddenly. Those rear-only drum brakes might as well be decorative for all the good they do. But none of that matters. The beast of Turin wasn't built to be practical. It wasn't built to be safe. It wasn't built to be sensible. It was built to be the fastest thing on 4 wheels. And for a brief moment in 1911, it was. And that's all that mattered. You know what I love most about this story? It's that Fiat never did anything like this again. They had their moment of insanity, built their monster, proved their point, and then went back to building normal cars. Well, normal for Fiat anyway. It's like they got it all out of their system in one go. Can you imagine if they'd kept going? If the beast of Turin had been the start of an arms race of increasingly huge engines? We could have ended up with 40-liter engines, 50-liter engines, 100-liter engines, cars the size of buildings with pistons the size of refrigerators. It would have been absolutely ridiculous and absolutely amazing. But that's not what happened. The Beast marked the end of an era, not the beginning. After 1911, the focus shifted to making cars faster through better engineering, not just bigger engines. Aerodynamics became important. Weight reduction became critical. Handling started to matter. The days of solving every problem with more displacement were over. In a way, that makes the Beast even more special. It stands alone as the ultimate expression of a particular kind of madness. A 28.35-liter inline-4 will never be built again. Nothing like it will ever exist again. It's a complete one-off in the history of automotive engineering. Modern engineers look at the Beast the way archaeologists look at the pyramids. Technically impressive, sure, but why would anyone do that? With modern technology, you could get 1,000 horsepower from a 2-liter engine. You could go 300 miles per hour with proper aerodynamics. You could stop on a dime with carbon ceramic brakes. The Beast's approach of just making everything enormous seems quaint by comparison. But that misses the point entirely. The Beast of Turin wasn't about being optimal. It wasn't about being efficient. It was about pushing the boundaries of what was possible with the technology available. It was about showing the world that Italy could build something extraordinary. It was about going faster than anyone had gone before. Consequences be damned. There's something beautifully pure about that. No compromise, no half measures. Just a simple goal, to go fast, and the most direct possible solution to build the biggest engine ever. It's engineering reduced to its most basic form. Problem, solution, execution. The fact that the solution was insane is beside the point. The legacy of the Beast lives on in unexpected ways. Every time an engineer proposes something ridiculous and gets told yes, that's the spirit of the Beast. Every time a manufacturer builds something just to prove they can, that's the Beast's DNA. Every time someone looks at a sensible solution and decides to do something spectacular instead, they're channeling 1910 Fiat. We need more Beasts of Turin in the world. Not literally. Please, don't build any more 28-liter engines, but we need that spirit. That willingness to try something completely absurd just to see if it works. That commitment to pushing boundaries, even when the boundaries are perfectly fine where they are. That beautiful, reckless abandon in the pursuit of being the fastest. The Beast of Turin reminds us that engineering isn't just about solving problems efficiently. Sometimes it's about solving them spectacularly. Sometimes it's about doing something so outrageous that people are still talking about it over a century later. Sometimes it's about building a monster just because you can. So here's to Fiat. Here's to the engineers who designed this thing. Here's to Pietro Bordino and his enormous testicles. Here's to Duncan Pittaway for bringing it back to life. And here's to the Beast of Turin itself. 28.35 liters of pure, unbridled insanity. The biggest engine ever put in a car. A testament to what happens when ambition completely overwhelms common sense. The Beast of Turin shouldn't exist. It's too big, too dangerous, too impractical, too everything. But it does exist. It was built, it was raced, it was abandoned, and it was reborn. It stands as proof that sometimes the worst ideas are the best ideas. Sometimes the wrong answer is the right answer. Sometimes you just need to build a 28-liter engine and see what happens. And what happened was glorious, terrifying, deafening, flame-spewing glory. The beast of Turin earned its name. It really was a beast, a magnificent, ridiculous, awe-inspiring beast that showed the world what was possible when engineers stopped asking, should we, and started asking, can we? The answer, as it turned out, was yes. Yes, you can put a 28-liter engine in a car. Yes, it will go very fast. Yes, it will try to kill everyone involved. And yes, it will be absolutely worth it. Because 113 years later, we're still talking about it. Still marveling at it. Still slightly terrified of it. That's the real achievement of the Beast of Turin. Not the speed records, not the engineering, not even the survival and rebuild. It's that it made such an impression that over a century later, it still has the power to amaze us. In a world of million-dollar hypercars and 1,000-horsepower electric sedans, a 28-liter inline-4 from 1910 still stops people in their tracks. Maybe that's the lesson here. Maybe the point isn't to build something sensible or efficient or even particularly good. Maybe the point is to build something unforgettable, something that makes people say, they built what? Something that defies explanation and logic and basic safety standards. Something like the Beast of Turin. So the next time someone tells you your idea is too crazy, too big, too dangerous, too impractical, remember the beast. Remember that in 1910, a bunch of Italian engineers decided to put a 28-liter engine in a car. They did it. It worked. And we're still talking about it today. That's the power of doing something completely unreasonable. That's the magic of the Beast of Turin. Long may it roar.